And welcome back. Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. And we're moving now into our first segment. A very important conversation with a great person. I hold her dearly.
You think so?
From the days of jazz time. I still hold that dear to my heart. It is about human rights. That's the conversation we're about to have. And we're going to have that conversation with none other than the Minister of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, none other than the Honorable Dolores Balderamos Garcia. Good morning.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I don't got no money for pay you for that one.
Johnny's a marketer.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's
and
nice
may
to see you.
2023 be wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year to you young people.
So let's get on into it. I mean, you know, we hear a lot about human rights, and there might be folks who might not understand necessarily what human rights
Universal.
is. You know, if it's universal, if it's only in Belize, if it's everywhere you go, what kind of rights do you have when you leave a country? What is human rights? What do we mean by that?
What we basically mean is that every human being, every single human being, is born with dignity and with certain inalienable characteristics. In other words, inalienable, you can't take it away. So we are born, each and every one of us, with inalienable characteristics and what we call human rights and fundamental freedoms. Now, many years ago, this idea, this concept of people having rights, things that you cannot take away, it had to evolve. And then, luckily, in and around the 1940s, and especially during and after World War II, with the League of Nations first and then the United Nations, the concept took root and it developed, and then there were 58 nations back in 1948, on the 10th of December of 1948. And I'm so pleased that the person who chaired the committee for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on that day, in that year, was Eleanor Roosevelt. And she chaired that committee, and in Paris, France, on the 10th of December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was imprinted, it was launched, it made its entrance into the world. And ever since, we have all based our constitutions, our countries' developments and all of that on this concept of human rights and fundamental freedoms, which are enshrined in our Constitution, as in many other constitutions, written and unwritten. We have a written Constitution, as we all know. And the preamble to our Constitution talks about the supremacy of God. Human rights, our faith, our undying faith in human rights and fundamental freedoms. What are these things? Well, the right to life, the right not to be tortured, the right to shelter, the right, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of any disability, regardless of language, culture, those rights, regardless of all the various aspects, must be respected. And interestingly, within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about any other status. So you could have a status of, yes, thank you. You could have a status of anything. It could be your language. It could be the fact that you have a disability. It could be your gender or your gender identity.
Sexual orientation, all of
your
these
sexual
things.
orientation, whatever it may be, right? And whatever other status, so that it is all inclusive. So if they didn't mention something, you know, the color of your hair, the shape of your nose, whatever, everybody has these inalienable rights that we must respect if we are going to have a good country, if we're going to have democratic values, if we are going to have respect, not only tolerance, but also acceptance. And our ministry I call it the people ministry, the caring ministry, because what do? We look at the aspect of vulnerable people. We look at the aspect of children. We look at the aspect of women. We look at the aspect of the elderly people. We now have a disability desk, for example.
That's so great.
Which is staffed. I don't want to say manned by, although he's a man. It is staffed by our good friend, Marshall Nunez.
Yes.
And he has really been a fantastic advocate for persons with disability. And I have been keenly aware of it, because myself, I noticed that the National Assembly, you don't have any elevator, you don't have any wheelchair access, and it's personal for me because of my surgery last year, doing well, but focusing now on coming back to what are human rights. Those aspects of us as human beings that you cannot and you must not take away from me. I think we just when we sat down here and we said, well, somebody who has killed somebody, does that person have human rights? Does that person have rights? And it's very much on the agenda. We had the arraignment of an alleged cold-blooded killer, alleged yesterday, and that person has human rights.
Yeah.
That person has human rights. You can't beat up the person. You can't not give that person due process, because people have a right to protest their innocence,
of course,
and people have a right to make sure that the processes that take place in the country are in keeping with the respect that we must have for each and every human being.
Well, let's talk about the ministry now,
Yes,
because
yes.
I love that you went there, and I love the fact that now there is a desk for folks with disability, because for the most part we take that for granted. And everybody, there is somebody within a household, or there's somebody who knows somebody with a disability.
Right.
Let's talk about the strengthening of these rights and the fact that people are aware by your ministry, from whence you found to now where you are.
Right.
Let's talk about that work.
Well, we have work to do,
Yes.
because we still have to bring in the legislation, even though we have signed on to the international treaties. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the international treaties as well. We've signed on to these international treaties on like for instance, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. But we also recognize that there are international treaties recognizing the rights of Indigenous people, for example, and of course, the one that we're looking at right now, persons with disability or disabilities. And so what we have to do is bring some of those aspects of what we have signed on to internationally into our national law. Now, it doesn't mean that because it's not a part of our national law, we mustn't respect it, because once you sign on to an international treaty, you do have treaty obligations. Right. For example, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. We have to report periodically as to how Belize is doing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for a number of years, we haven't submitted our reports, but we are working on updating what we should have put in, and then, of course, submitting it so that the United Nations Committee can look at us and sort of tell us, okay, you're doing great here, you need to improve there. And I would like to see, I'm not making a hard and fast commitment, because we have to look at it, but I would like to see us have national legislation on persons with disability. In the meantime, with the advocacy of Mr. Marshall and his people, we are bringing the level of awareness, the sensitization, to let us recognize all forms of disability. It could be mental, because, for example, we have Autism Belize as a representative now on our National Commission for Families and Children. And oh, by the way, before I forget, in the preamble to our Constitution, it talks about the important position of the family in the life of the Belizean nation. Now, again, going back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Belize was admitted to the United Nations after our independence on the 25th of September. We had our independence on the 21st, 1981. On the 25th, we were admitted as a full member of the United Nations. And so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights applies to us, just as it applies across the globe.
Yeah.
And that is why we have to respect it to that extent.
Even,
we have the right to privacy. We have the right that you barge into my house. We have the right to our space, that kind of thing. Now, there are certain restrictions on those rights, because if I have a right, that gives you a responsibility.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If I have a right to sit down here and not freeze, you have a responsibility to make sure that the AC not too cold for me.
I think she's telling us to.
No. No, I'm actually fine.
Yeah.
I always wear a little underblouse,
Yeah,
so that
to make sure that you're
to make
cool.
sure that
Warm.
you.
Yes.
No, but I'm just saying that with every right comes an accompanying responsibility, and that is why within our ministry we have not only the various departments, but we also have the statutory bodies.
Right.
The National Commission for Families and Children, the National Council on Aging, right? And the National Women's Commission. Very important and very, very near and dear to our heart. And we have a lot of people who are working very assiduously, very, very hard at making sure that what we do in our country to support and promote the rights of our children in particular, and I'll come to women in a minute, but children in particular have rights. We must recognize that those rights are protected. And that is why our National Commission, we were dismayed at a very lenient ruling that a judge made the other day, about a month ago or so, in relation to the sexual abuse of a 9-year-old child. And I think there was something like a suspended sentence or something like that. And we felt in the National Commission that that kind of sentence was absolutely too lenient.
Yeah.
There might have been some consideration on the part of the judge in that particular case. And I believe the case is still under review, so I have to speak guardedly and a little bit carefully, But there might have been some recognition on the part of the judge at the time that the first offense took place when the perpetrator was underage. I think he was 17. But there seemed in that case to have been a repeat offense. And so we have to look at it carefully.
Yes.
I think the office of the DPP is looking at it carefully. It's still sub judice. It's still, I think, before the court. So we just have to be careful. But we felt, and our chair and executive director at the NCFC felt that we should have made a statement, and we did, because the protection of children is so very, very important in our country,
Minister, I wanted to go back to a really crucial point that you said, that Belize hadn't been giving updates on their
on the reporting, on the conventions.
And, right. Therefore, going into 2023, how is the Ministry of Human Development seeking to find the information? Because I know that there's some reliance on the Statistics Institute, but I know you also have to do your own research as well.
Of course.
So how is the ministry looking to gather their own data, and then when are you planning to file a report?
We're hoping to file both reports this year. They're late. I acknowledge that. We're hoping to file them this year for sure. But the way we would go about reporting really for the CEDAW Convention to eliminate discrimination against women, that comes from the National Women's Commission.
Okay.
And then, of course, the NCFC is more involved in the reporting on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So we're working on it. We have various people looking at them to update to where we would like to be, and then we will submit.
What is the vital information that needs to go into these reports?
Children in conflict with the law, for example, vulnerable children, migrant children, children who are growing up in difficult circumstances. We used to call it uncontrollable behavior, but we don't call it that anymore. And we don't call it the hostel anymore. We call it New Beginnings Youth Center.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we want to, names are important. Names are very, very important. And so children, not only in conflict with the law, some are, but other children who maybe come from a dysfunctional family, or there's no father, there's no mother, maybe there's a granny, there's an auntie, and those children have experienced a level of vulnerability. And that is why we as we have them be at the New Beginnings Center, but for the shortest period of time and only where absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
But I am hearing good things about our staff at New Beginnings, and I'm really hoping that it's not a place to house people. It's you don't lock them away.
Yeah.
You know, they used to say send in a hostel. But New Beginnings, we want the name to reflect our goal of the New Beginnings Center being under the Community Rehabilitation Department, with the focus on rehabilitation and growth for little children,
because
and teenagers and people in conflict.
Yeah, because how do you give somebody a start, and then still put them in a spot that is labeled? Mentally, that's not good for me, because
not at all.
I'm going to a spot where that is of heavy discrimination.
Right.
I'm not going to a spot
Right.
where that I know that I could be rehabilitated and then being placed into society as somebody that is productive.
Precisely.
But I want to go to the services offered by the Human Development, Families, and Indigenous People Affairs. There was a news story, and I'm glad that you brought up that particular news item. But there was also one, I think, about 2 weeks ago, when that it seems of discrimination of sexual preference that occurred in San Pedro. As a matter of fact, there are so many of these stories, countless times within the news, maybe not even making the news. But they might feel, I need some kind of a service. I want to go somewhere that I'm able to speak. If we're going to make human rights be at the tip top, for people to be cognizant that it is at the tip top, then I need somewhere that I can go. I need somewhere that I'm able to speak how I feel and know that I am protected because this is how I feel. Okay. Are those services offered by the Human Development Office?
And other agencies. We listen to reports and we guide people to the right place where they should go. There is a Human Rights Council, and we do have an ombudsman. And so there are various agencies. But yes, indeed, I want to tell you that our ministry looks at this kind of situation. Yeah. That homophobic attack in San Pedro, we absolutely must condemn it. Yeah. We must condemn it because we, in 2023 in Belize, we cannot be saying, oh, because of religion or because of the way you feel, you will not afford somebody their full respect and rights. There is no place in Belize for that kind of homophobic attack and for any sort of discrimination. I mean, many people in the LGBT community go through very, very, very difficult times. Yes. And like I say, the idea of any fundamentalist faith could never trump the human rights of anybody in Belize. And that is the point that we absolutely need to make. I want to, by the way, before I forget, I want to mention, because we have to be aware of world affairs and all that.
Of course.
On the 1st of January, 3 days ago, the president of Brazil was sworn in. Yes. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva de Cala Lula.
De Cala Lula, yes.
Yes, and unfortunately, his predecessor left the country and didn't hand over the presidential sash to him. So they asked a very humble person to hand, I think it was somebody who used to clean the street. They asked that person to please hand the sash to Lula. And you know what he did at his inauguration? He surrounded himself with many, many vulnerable people representing vulnerable groups, yes, you know. Yes. There was a little black boy, I think 9 or 10 years old. Then there was a blind person because the person had a cane. There was an indigenous person in their get-up and their regalia and whatnot. His wife was there. And you could see the kind of inclusion that he signaled. This is the 3rd time he's become president. Yes. And I think, you know, he's at an age and stage where he wants to signal that that great and huge country of South America is open for business in terms of the respect for human rights and the equality and inclusion. And by the by, may cannot forget to say that the motto of our Ministry of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs is equality and inclusion. Now, you might not have full equality across the board, but we also look for equity, you know, because equality means everything even.
Yeah.
Equity means you get according to your need and according to where you are. Those who are better off may not get the same amount of money, for example, as somebody who has a greater need in terms of when you're giving protection. Or we just had hurricane.
Right.
You know, we just had hurricane. We have to look at people who have the greater need. But in terms of the human rights, I think the message today is that 2023 Belize, let us give that level of respect. We are going to be promulgating our new version of the National Gender Policy. We would like to look at what was then called the Equal Opportunity Legislation, and see if we can come up with something that we can agree with. Because there really is no need to jump up and down and holler and scream, because Belize is attempting to afford all of the basic and fundamental human rights that all of us should enjoy. So I really would like to send that message. And I think with the inauguration of Lula and his message of equality and inclusion in his country. And there he is, there he is. His message of equality and inclusion, I think, resonates and reverberates across the world. And we in Belize, we can only do the best that we can do when we include our indigenous people, our Maya sisters and brothers, our Garifuna sisters and brothers, people who have experienced difficulty and who we would like to focus on. By the way, we have an office of our Commissioner of Indigenous People, Mr. Greg Chuck, down in Punta Gorda, you know. So yeah, yes.
Given the conversation about inclusion,
it's rich and yes,
and you know, Belize is a multi-ethnic platform for, I think, all of Caribbean and Central America. How does the Human Rights or Human Development Office believe that they're able to provide this level or this idea of equity throughout the country? And I want to focus primarily on the People's Committee. And I know that's not necessarily your department, but when that was first formed,
the constitutional reform?
Yes.
Okay.
Right? Everybody believed that they needed to have a seat at the table because they didn't feel like they were being heard. Right? So in that essence, that feeling of needing to be heard, how does your ministry, how does your department think that they're able to help subdue that in the society, that I will be heard, that John will be heard, that my, you know, my disability sister and brother will be heard, they will have a seat at the table?
Well, we feel that we feel that as many people as possible should have a seat at the table. No, I mean, we can't have a constitutional reform. Right. We can't have a constitutional reform commission of 200 people.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that a good attempt has been made to include as many of our voices as we possibly can. I mean, and there are a lot of lawyers on the commission, to your notice. So there probably will be full discussions. So there will be full, and you know, I want to quote one of my colleagues, Honorable Francis Fonseca, Minister of Education. I want to kind of quote him and say, it just might be, talking about that Constitutional Reform Commission, it just might be that the least important thing in terms of the work of that commission in really reforming fundamentally our Constitution, the least important thing might be what we're going to do with the monarchy. That just may be the least important thing. What may be more important is what kind of society do we want to forge? You know, what are we going to do about the judiciary? What are we going to do about governance? Those are some of the issues that I think we have to look at. And I am pleased that the LGBT community is at the table. It's in the legislation. So please, I make this point, I go out of my way to make this point, that LGBT community as a member of the Constitutional Reform Commission, it's a part of the law now. So we can't say that we don't know that there is that level of vulnerability and that responsibility now on our part to look at all Belizeans and everybody in Belize. You know, we have so many stories of people who have been discriminated against. You want to ask one question?
Yeah. I'd listen.
No trouble, no trouble.
I'd listen, you know, because all of these things are very important. Dispensing information is how we learn, which brings me to ask the question, especially in today's day and age, 2023. We expect we got some flying car, no? But but let's talk about the work that is being done or that will be done in schools, so as for them or the students to be cognizant that they've got rights. We're still seeing some discrimination in schools.
Yes.
These children are still being taught speak when spoken to. I'm still seeing schoolwork that says fill in the gender. Nurse, female. Doctor, male. Mechanic, male. Cook or chef, female. No. If we are going to speak equality, and we spoke about this earlier this morning.
Okay, great.
Then it must be levied in the grassroots. So, in terms of human development and speaking rights from the grassroots level, what's going to happen in the schools, or how are we going to dispense these information in here?
Well, we continue to advocate. That is the thing. And I am very pleased that within the Ministry of Education you have, I don't know if it's a desk or a department, but it looks at special education.
Yes.
That is looking at special education, and I can call her name Miss Christy Almeida. She's also the director of Autism Belize. But I believe that within the Ministry of Education, her role is to look at special education and to make sure that there is that level of inclusivity in bringing awareness, in involving children with special needs in the educational system, but also in promulgating and making sure that what we teach our children is that level of gender parity and gender inclusiveness. I have my one of my officers at the Women and Family Support Department. She says her little girl may love play with trucks, and somebody used to tell her, you mustn't play with trucks. But she told her little girl, if you like play with truck, go right ahead and play with the truck. No trouble there.
Women the drive bus now.
We should do the same for our boys, and this is where it comes. This is where I believe that disparity comes to play in our society. Where, of course, please by all means uplift your daughters. Make sure they can be whatever they want
to be. Precisely.
But so can our boys.
Yes.
And I think that when we have this conversation about female empowerment, we tend to forget that we should also empower our boys as well.
It's how we raise our children.
Right. And you know,
not only how we raise our girls, but how we raise our boys, which leads me, if you allow me.
Yes, I was segueing into that.
We've got about 2 minutes.
That's right. Which leads me, and maybe this would be a nice way to wrap up, you know, Let me say this. Women's rights are human rights. Let's internalize that. Let's internalize that. Women's rights are human rights. If we see inequality, if we see women being battered, if we see children not getting an opportunity, if we see inequity, a woman not being paid the amount that a man is being paid for the same kind of job, that tells us that we have our work to do and we have our work cut out for us. Now, one of my favorite authors is a Nigerian woman. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I think I have everything by her in terms of her novels and whatnot. And this is a tiny little book. It's about 48 pages. And it's called We Should All Be Feminists. And feminism and being a feminist, it is not a bad word. No. It's absolutely not a bad word. It's not a bad word. So I recommend that we should all be feminists in the best and the most inclusive and expansive definition of the word. And if you allow me, I'll just read the last part.
Sure.
She says here, when all those years ago, I looked the word feminist up in the dictionary. It said, a feminist is a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. And that are nothing That not rocket science.
No.
That are not rocket science. My great-grandmother, from stories I've heard, was a feminist. She ran away from the house of the man she did not want to marry and married the man of her choice. She refused, protested, spoke up whenever she felt that she was being deprived of land and access because she was female. She did not know the word feminist, but it doesn't mean she wasn't one. More of us should reclaim that word. The best feminist I know is my brother Kene, who is also a kind, good-looking, and very masculine young man. My own definition of feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there is a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it, and we must do better. All of us, women and men, must do better, and we must be feminists. I think that's a great way.
That's a great wrap-up.
Yes.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
women's rights are human rights. Human rights are inalienable. They cannot be taken away. And I want to say, at the beginning of 2023, let's work together.
Yeah.
Let's work together.
Yeah.
The ministry can do its job, but we could never do it alone.
Yeah.
We must have our NGOs, our civil society, or everybody to be sensitized that we must respect our vulnerable people and afford to every single person in Belize that level of human rights and fundamental freedoms that the Constitution calls for and that we believe in because we are progressive.
Wonderful.
Honorable
Thank you so
Dolores Balderamos Garcia, graced with your presence this morning.
No trouble.
We're so thankful for that. Minister of Human Development, Families, and Indigenous Peoples Affairs. Thank you for joining us.
No trouble,
Thank
no
you.
trouble. And I will come back again for when we have the
Please.
furthering of the
Further of our
discussion.
discussion.
Yes.
We're
Thank you
going
again.
we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the growth of Belize's economy and production and what's going on in there. We talk about what the $5 minimum wage rates
Yeah.
as of the start of the year. We'll be having that discussion when we come back. Stay with us.